Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3, testing. 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 Hello, Martin. Right.
Oh, do we have a designated seat?
No, particularly just on this front row or wherever.
Right, welcome everybody to the first meeting of the Neighbourhoods and Economy and Neighbourhoods Scrutiny panel for this municipal year. Welcome to everyone to the meeting. Just to start off with, if we can do some introductions of the panel members and other members who are attending the meeting, cabinet members and council officers, if you could actually introduce yourselves when you make a contribution. So we'll start off with introductions. I will introduce myself first. I'm Rob Walker and I'm the lead member for this panel.
Mark Mercer, co-optee, here as a grumpy member of the public.
Richard Murgatroyd, hopefully not a grumpy councillor.
Harpreet Uppal, councillor for Ashbrow Ward. Thanks. Judith Hughes, Almondbury councillor.
Bill Armour, Kirkburton Ward councillor.
Right, thank you. And we've just had one apology from a panel member for this morning, which is Councillor Martin Bold, who's had to attend another meeting. Yes. Okay, so first item is the minutes of the previous meeting. So people who are, a couple of people who were present at the last meeting. So if you like to have a look through those and could you just approve those as a correct record of the meeting? We do approve those. Thank you. Right, matters arising then. So from page 1, are there any matters arising? Yes, Judith. Sorry. Right. Could you just come back to say? Right, just from yeah. Just from page 1, there were a number of things linked to transport issues, and I'd agreed to follow up the request with Keith Bloomfield, the operations manager of the West Yorkshire Transport Fund, looking at what was happening with rail services and bus services. A lot of that work, sort of looking at what's happened, has really been sucked into the area of rail transport issues. So a lot of the things have been happening both within the council and outside the council, because we have had some really serious problems after the introduction of the new train services in May. I must admit that I've not done as much work on what's happened with the bus services. What I suggest here is that we just get a quick report back on this at a later meeting, perhaps at the next meeting, rather than it being something that we discuss in depth. Right, okay. Is there anything from page 2? Okay, page 3, Judith.
Yeah, if we look at where it says in summary, the discussion and questions went on to focus on. So the second bullet point, we had a request for more information from officers on the age profile and number of homeless people and rough sleepers. We've not received that information. The bullet point underneath, the implementation impacts of the transition to universal credit, We did talk about getting minutes from the Tackling Poverty Working Group, but we've not received those minutes. And then the next bullet point, a request for officers to provide all councillors with some appropriate contact details to allow them to refer cases involving domestic violence. So we did ask for that as well, and we've not received that. And I have recently had a council contact me asking me how do they deal with someone with domestic violence.
Right. Yeah, those are things I think we need to follow up, and we need to look at getting the reports back on them. I think one thing that has happened, which you'll probably be aware of, is that the Tackling Poverty Committee has actually reached the end of its life, and it is actually being replaced by a new grouping. But I think it is still quite important that we do get a report back on the impact of the introduction of universal credit. That was something originally I asked for the Tackling Poverty Group to look at. I also think that the issue of domestic violence is something that is really important. It has actually been, it's going to be one of the key items that the Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee is going to look at for this year. So at the meeting on Monday, it was agreed that that will be a key item on the agenda, so that is going to be addressed. Right, anything else? Right, okay, thank you. Right, item 2, which is interests. Have any of the panel members got any interests that they wish to declare? There is the form in the pack as well on page 7 and 8, which you can fill in if there are any interests which you want to declare. Right. Item 3, admissions of the public. This is a meeting in public. It's obviously being webcast, and members of the public have got the opportunity to come in and listen to our discussions as well as watching it online. Right. Item 4 is setting the work programme. So this a really important item, which is going to really determine the work that we're doing for the rest of the year. So we've got a number of issues here. What I suggest that we do is that we go through them. I don't want to get into the detail of any of these things, but we might want to think about the focus within those areas that we look at. Perhaps have a look at the things in the bullet points. Are there things that have been missed there? So if we go through those, and as we're doing that, if we think about the priority of these items, and if we can think about our scheduling, about the order in which we're likely to take things, there are also 1 or 2 additional things that have come up since this paper was put together, which have been suggested either by officers or by cabinet members. There may also be things that members of the panel wish to put forward, and we may add to this list of things that we're going to cover in the work programme. So the first issue, housing. Yes, I will do this. As we look at these things, I will ask the relevant cabinet member or officer to comment on these things. Carl, I don't know if you want to start us off as the sort of lead officer for most of these issues, just to say something about the package of things, really, before we go on to housing. I'll ask Cathy to talk about housing.
Happy to chair. Start, maybe introduce myself. I'm Carl Battersby. I'm the Strategic Director for Economy and Infrastructure for the Council. So for those of you that are new in post, my area covers a number of things. It covers all the sort of planning and development and regeneration functions. It covers pretty much all the council's frontline functions, so waste, highways, maintenance, street lighting, all those types of functions. Covers housing, covers bereavement services as well, and a range of issues. But I suppose simply, if it's not adult social care or education or children's social care, it's usually me. So if there's things you want to raise, obviously I'm more than happy to act as a point of context. Just in terms of what we've sort of put forward, I think what we've tried to choose I think, is the big, chunky, strategic areas for a discussion. Because what we could have chosen is lots of smaller individual bits and bats. So clearly, housing is a huge priority for the Council in terms of our aspirations for growth. And it would seem right that we bring that here. And I know there's a later agenda item on the emerging housing strategy. Towns and communities in Kirklees, big theme around the Council around the fact that Kirklees is a very diverse borough and one size doesn't fit all, and some clear imperatives around regeneration, particularly of Dewsbury and Huddersfield. So again, thought that was something that Scrutiny could get usefully involved in. And linked to that is obviously where we see the economy of the borough going, and the fact that we have an economic strategy that requires refresh, and we're in the midst of that process. So getting the panel's views on what that looks like, does it say the right things about the borough, and your views into that before that's finalised would be useful. Linked to that, if we're going to have a growing economy and we're going to regenerate the place, we need people to have the right skills to be able to access those job opportunities and actually retain the people with the skills in the borough to help support the economy. So skills is a key element of that, and we thought that would be a useful discussion here. And at the moment, pretty much all my time is spent on waste and cleansing, so we thought we'd share that with you as well. But particularly around you know, how we improve the environment, how we improve in recycling rates, and actually how we take that forward. So we have a waste PFI contract which expires in 2023. We clearly have ongoing issues in terms of general service delivery. We have low recycling rates, and clearly we want to do more in this area. So that involves some big things around how we involve the public in waste minimisation and recycling, and we thought it would be really useful to get Scrutiny involved in that, because clearly you have a role to play in terms of supporting your local communities in being able to recycle more to help us effectively with our environmental criteria. So we thought those were 5 sort of big chunky areas really that we could make real progress on this year, and we'd welcome your views on it. Chair.
What I might do, I think, before we come back to this, is just mention the other 3 things that have come up. So, just so we've got an overview of 8 potential areas before you may want to make a contribution. So, other things that have come up as potential things for us to look at are the clean air strategy, the green space strategy, and looking at, I suppose it's a broad thing about fire risk post Grenville Tower, and in particular, possibly as a starting point, the Hackett report, although from discussions I've had earlier this morning, we may want to go beyond that. So that's 3 extra things potentially that we may look at. So what I suggest now is that we work through these, and if we can ask the relevant cabinet member for each of these areas just to give us a quick introduction. The first one, which is housing, is a little bit different than the others in that it is already on the agenda as a substantive item for this morning's meeting, and I know Cathy's going to introduce that. So I don't know if you want to say much, really, Cathy, about housing at this stage, or do you want to hold your fire till later?
I'll hold my fire till later.
Right, that's fine.
I'll hold my fire till later.
Yeah. Right, the next chunk of things, the next 3 items, the economic strategy, town and communities, and skills strategy, all fall into the portfolio of Peter McBride. So if you'd like to just introduce these for us, Peter.
Thank you, Chair. My portfolio responsibility is regeneration, transportation, skills and strategic planning. Carl's summed up what we're intending to do with regard to town centres and other village and township centres. Our priorities with regard to skills are being developed. You and I are part of that process. We had a meeting only on Friday. We're also trying to develop a strategy based on the implementation of the local plan. It's likely that the local plan is going to go through now. The inspectors said yes to the housing sites in the locations and in the numbers, which was the critical issue. We have not been so successful in terms of getting land for industry and commerce. You know, Cooper Bridge was one of our big priorities, and that has not been included. At least all but about an 1/8 of it have not been, no, I think it's about a 1/3 of it have not been included. That will mean that we're going to have to look for some industrial commercial land in the future, maybe within about 5 years. That's another story. So what we're trying to do now is develop a strategy based around what's available to us now in terms of planning, because planning opens up a new vista, because we'll be the only authority in the city region with an updated local plan. That gives us a real advantage in terms of future investment for housing and for industry. So the strategy will be very largely based around that, and the strategy of Wicker, which is based around the West Yorkshire Transport Scheme, the West Yorkshire Transport Fund. And additionally, a major factor in the situation is the decision by the Department of Transport, which will be spelt out in more detail, but they do intend to spend £3 billion on the TransPennine. You may be aware of the fact that TransPennine, well, the proposal originally was to electrify the whole line. The government has paused that and then said it was rethinking. So it may be there will be an upgrade, or an upgrade with a full electrification, or an upgrade involving a hybrid, which would be partial electrification. We do know that some of that is going to happen. We know that about of the 3 billion, at least 1 billion is going to be spent between Huddersfield and Ravensthorpe. Almost certainly there's going to be a major investment in Huddersfield Station, including Platform 9, and the underpass is going to be developed. That much we know. So our strategy is very largely based on the investment of the Council, the West Yorkshire Transport Fund, what TransPennine will do, and making sure that skills and developments subsequent to these involve our people. So we need a skills strategy to go with it. And as I say, you and I were talking at length about this with relevant partners to achieve that objective. I think that's enough for the moment, yeah.
So, I mean, forgive me if I'm obviously it's my first meeting, so I may not be covering the right item. But just looking at so we've got 3 interrelated issues: towns and communities in Kirklees, economic strategy and skills. And just in terms of the first one, number 2, on the potential issues identified for inclusion sheet on page 1. Basically, I've been struck actually by how many kind of people in my ward have actually said they've kind of stopped going into Huddersfield town centre on a Saturday or what have you for shopping and so on. And obviously this is something that we obviously really want to address, which I know you agree. And related to that, in terms of boosting economic growth, I mean, we also know that small and medium enterprises are actually the very backbone of the local economy and need to be encouraged. So I suppose what I'm trying to get at is whether we could perhaps build into the work of the Scrutiny panel, looking at issues around kind of developing, markets and developing smaller traders and so on, because obviously so many people now rely on self-employment in the retail sector as a way of, making a living. So, and we've got some tremendous markets. I mean, Queensgate is fantastic. What a building. Something we really should be proud of, and so many good things in terms. So anyway, that was just one thing that struck me, and the second thing was there's obviously loads of new ideas flying around about community wealth building and focusing, and I know the council's taking it up already. They're working with Cles and so on. Just around, I don't know, that would be something else maybe we could think about is, looking at specific community wealth building kind of initiatives that have been taken elsewhere, but also really test them and ask some hard questions. Do they actually work? how do they work? How much of an impact are they really making, on people's lives locally? So, yeah, those were the two things I would have mentioned.
It's working now. Yeah. Just something to pick up on that Rob mentioned about the fire risk and the Hackett review. I do think we need a working group on that. I am involved in it through the Home Office and the Fire Services Management Committee. But with the new competent authority coming in, which local councils will be involved in, I do think we need to sit down and see how much that's going to affect us as a council. I feed in through the fire authority side of things, but I think the council need to feed in as well, and what it's going to mean to a council.
Right, yeah, we've kind of jumped ahead a little bit with that one, but I think that's an extremely good, I think it's an extremely good point, and it does link back into the housing things. Yeah, Cathy, I think you want to come in there.
Yeah, I have to totally agree with Councillor Hughes on that. Building regulations and fire safety is paramount to this authority and should be across this country in any construction industry, particularly where it's housing. I agree with you that regarding the board that's going to be set up, and we'll embrace that, but I think we do need a subgroup, and I think we'd welcome that, for them to go away and work on that and look at it, because this Hackett review, it's really, really important that we actually put our stake in the ground and say that Kirklees is doing something about it. You will be aware that in our budgets, we did set money aside for the sprinkler systems. It's part of this administration's policy, and our political beliefs that, sprinkler systems should be put in high-rise buildings. So,
yeah, I think that's a very good suggestion to set up the working group. Is it the view that that is a group that should be set up to do some work and then report back later in the year to bring the findings back to this committee? And would we be looking at including people, inviting people from other councillors from outside this committee to potentially join in with that? Obviously, there will be a range of different officers. What do people think about membership? The other issues, I suppose, is chairing a group like this. I don't know if there's anybody who would be interested in taking on that role.
Yeah, I'd be happy to take on that role, especially as my role within fire. Can you hear me now? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'd be happy to take that role on, seeing as I'm already involved with the Home Office on this.
Okay, so I don't know if other people want to indicate an interest in becoming involved in this now, and that if we want to put out a wider message to other councillors and invite people to take part. Don't know what your views are on that, Cathy.
yeah, I think that's absolutely paramount, that anybody that wants to be involved should be involved. And I welcome what Councillor Hughes has said about the fire authority, because at the end of the day, I think they know the best practice as well, and they advise us on safety. So it's important that if you're inviting partners in that are actually coming to talk, I'd welcome, other organisations coming in, but I too would like to be part of that. Obviously I can't with it being the scrutiny role, but I'd like to be kept up to date, constantly to see, the things that we should be taking on board.
Right. Advice from Richard is that we need to take that through to the management committee to get agreement on that, but I definitely think we should do that. And given the fact that this was suggested by the chair of the management committee, I think that is something that definitely will be approved. So we need to do a little bit of work behind the scenes, getting that together, putting together terms of reference and deciding who's going to work under the chairmanship of Councillor Hughes. Thank you. Yeah. Chair. Yeah. Any further comments? Just going back for items 2, 3 and 4. Any further comments around those items? Yes, Harpreet.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to go back to point to towns and communities in Kirklees. I think, you know, it's great to hear that there's going to be a lot of investment in Dewsbury and Huddersfield, and obviously I was speaking to Naheed, the Cabinet member for Neighbourhoods, and she was telling me about the different, you've got the money for cleaning side and then obviously for the regen part of it as well. What I'm quite interested in is how we're deciding how to spend that money. So outside of the Cabinet, how are we engaging different communities within the town centre and stakeholders involved? Because I think that's really important. I think the other point that Richard made was that the town centre model nationally, you know, there's definitely some issues out there, isn't there, for town centres, and be interested to see how we're learning from different areas and what different models we're looking at. The retail model in town centres is, they are struggling, and just going to my normal coffee shops and things like that, I know they're struggling as well, and perhaps also looking at how we use it as a community space, how we use it as a residential space, urban green space. I know there's some work around the cultural hub, but again, how are we engaging the different communities there? I'd be really interested in knowing a little bit more about that.
Thank you. Anyone else? Right, yeah, so I think some interesting comments there. Yes, sorry.
I think there's some very good points being made, certainly about investment in town centres, and really the strategy is for short term and long term. In terms of the short term, the money we put aside, I think Naheed will talk about that in some greater detail, and I think we both welcome the fact that, you know, you and the wider community be involved in that process. And hopefully a little bit can be spent on the townships as well as just the town centres. It's a limited amount of money and it won't go terribly far. On the broader point, in terms of the long-term development of the town, it's going to be a long-term strategy. As everybody knows, towns are diminishing in size. Departmental stores are closing. You can see it reflected in our town centre and so on. What can we do to remediate that? I think it's to recognise what will be critical in the future to redefine a town. It will be people living in a town, it will be connectivity in the town, it will be activity and, what should we say, providing an experience which means that people want to come into the town as a kind of leisure time activity. You mentioned going to the coffee bar. That is a particular reason why people want to come. They want to go to the pub, they want to go to a restaurant, they want to go to a coffee bar. They want a nice experience. They have a reason to come into town to shop as opposed to going to the supermarket or going... That, I think, we've got to address. So living in the town is really important. Making it interesting to come into the town is important. We can do our bit, and I think we intend to do that. In the longer-term planning, we have plans to refurb our town centres insofar as we can. We don't own most of our two towns, but we have intended for some while to invest in the library and the market here. Now, that might mean a complete reconfiguration of what we mean by a library and what we mean by a market. And maybe the market might have to move, and we might do something with the existing building. In Dewsbury, similar sort of thing. The issue isn't, as it were, predetermined, other than we are investing in the Learning Quarter, we are investing in Pioneer House. We do intend to invest in that market as well, and it may mean that market will contract somewhat. So rather than seeing open stalls empty, smaller market, but partly closed in. Now, the details of how that might work out, I think the public might be involved in some significant way. And we'll be making announcements, what shall we say, in the not too distant future about the long-term planning as well as the short. And Naheed can talk in terms of the rest of it.
Yeah. I'll just come in on part of what Peter's saying, because it does fit in with the housing strategy as well. And we've got to be realistic here that town centres have changed. They're not like what they used to be. The markets are shrinking. People are choosing to go elsewhere to shop. However, Kirklees Council is investing in both Huddersfield and Dewsbury. And one of the key things that people don't realise, within the town centre, a lot of it can't change because you're within conservation areas. So the development rise. You've got absent landlords, which we are currently proactively tracking down, trying to deal with them issues to try and bring these properties back into use. There was a few years ago, myself and Peter were part of an initiative, Empty Clusters, which brought residential properties back into the town centre. These were old abandoned properties. We've heavily invested in that. K&H have actually got properties within Huddersfield and Dewsbury town centre so that people can commute to Leeds and that. So it's a big picture. They are working, they are consulting with stakeholders. There's a consultation going on in North Kirklees at the moment talking about Dewsbury. So they've actually met with the Chamber of Trade, they've met with councillors, they're talking to local people, there's been drop-in sessions, so that's constantly, it's what people want, rather than being paternalistic, saying, this is what you will have. Okay.
Thank you. Can I bring in Nahi?
I think I'd just like to support my colleagues in the sense that we are investing, we are listening, we are trying small pilots to work out precisely what brings in the footfall. We want a seamless experience. We don't want this short burst come in for an hour. Yes, if people want to do that, but we want an experience that goes from the morning to the evening, and it's smooth so that our coffee shops don't close at 4 o'clock, and between 4 and 6 there's nothing. We've been, as Councillor McBride and Councillor Scott have said, we've been encouraging town centre living. We've been investing with private investment buildings, so for example the Co-op building, to bring that back into use. We have recognised the heritage issues of our towns. Whilst maintaining those, we're actually interested in making sure that the buildings are being used. And I remember we did, I think we're continuing in Dewsbury, the shop frontages of the heritage buildings and how much that costs. And sometimes, you know, the landlords don't actually bring in as much as it would cost to uniformly translate all of that, and the council does that. We use our influence with our partners to say, if you're investing, please look at the overall picture. So we want to create a greater footfall. At the moment, we were doing temporary, contemporary. We were reusing our indoor markets. We're making sure that we develop that uniqueness around music and cultural experience. We're at the moment using our open green spaces in relation to creating biodiversity, wellness and cultural activities that take place. So when people come, they have an opportunity to experience the full extent of our offer. Thank you.
I mean, I really welcome all the comments that have been made. I just wanted to build on something Harpreet was saying actually earlier, because, you know, if you think about it, obviously the town centres are a place, but also, you know, another kind of strand of what we're doing as a council, what we have to do as a council, given the resources that we've got, is to kind of encourage and mobilise people in communities and, you know, at the grassroots to get involved. And I just wondered if, you know, in terms of scrutiny, there was another angle we could take, which would be, are there ways that we could actually encourage, you know, community groups or community engagement? But, you know, let's face it, it's taking place usually outside the town centres, but to find ways that we could bring them, those people, into the town centre as well. And that would add vibrancy and obviously have economic and social advantages. So in terms of scrutiny, obviously it's easy to talk about things like, you know, encouraging and measuring community engagement, but it's very difficult to do in practice. And really, so I don't know, maybe this is something as a panel we could think about, is about, you know, because I can't remember who mentioned multiple stakeholders, I think it was, so, and basically, you know, how can we actually measure and that kind of engagement process, and what methodology can we adopt as a council to actually kind of get that process going, and we can test whether it works or not, because that has to be, you know, a key part of the future, I think. So it's not an easy thing, but, you know.
Yeah. No,
In the temporary contemporary initiative, we brought in the university, the artists and other peoples from the community to bring in arts and cultural works to be displayed in our market and to use the library section in the future planning of that. We are actively monitoring the footfall, the engagement and the contribution of ideas whilst we're testing through pilots what is going to be working and what we can take forward, and that's how we are actually monitoring small initiatives that we are carrying out in our town centres.
Yeah, I'd like to go back to Richard on that. One of the things you did mention, Richard, was about working and how do you measure the outcomes, and I'll get that data. Well, with town centres, it's like fluid. Trends change within town centres, and I think we've got to bust the myth that it's only happening in Kirklees. This is happening across the country, and Kirklees is actually doing pretty well. And what happens is, when we have an empty unit within a town centre, it could be the tiniest little space, but it could be measured just the same as another big retail with thousands of square foot, and it's like for like, and it isn't. So we might have tiny little shop fronts, tiny ones, but you know, it's all different. I can assure you that all the consultations that are taken, that our consultants and all the information they do, it is made readily available. It's on the website. The reports are available. Dewsbury, and I don't want to favour Dewsbury because I know Huddersfield has it. We have a design guide that you're more than welcome to have a look at. It's there online so people can access it. But one of the problems that we have, whatever people talk your town down, nobody's going to spend that pound. So if I listen to a lot of the negativity, and it's about reversing that culture, and it starts with us. Thank you.
Yeah, I think creating a positive future and a positive vision for the town is very important. I think I can bring you back in a second, Peter. Mark, if you'd like to speak.
There's quite a lot to talk about investment. It's a very general term. I haven't got an image of how the council spends its money when it invests. Is it a question of giving grants? Is it a question of paying people to do more and more reports? Have I got access to actually how the money is spent when the council invests in a town centre?
Well, I think that is the kind of thing that we can investigate and look at in greater detail when we bring this back as a substantive item. Peter, I know you want to speak. You may want to comment on that.
I think we've got to bear in mind that what the council can do will have to be carefully and selectively focused, because the major developments taking place in town don't relate to the council. The council only owns less than a third of the whole town centre. What we can do is act as a catalyst for other people to invest. Now, an exemplar of that is the people who we've talked about living in the towns, living above shops, living above the offices, and so on. And Kathy's talked about that at some length. And the scheme that the government brought in, do you remember? And we supported that on the back of the government scheme. The net effect is, over a period of about 5 years, the number of people who live in our two towns has doubled in the last 5 years. Now, most of the investment there has not been with the councils. It's been us working with the private sector. So, for example, developing my exemplar knowledge is more in terms of Huddersfield than it is in terms of Dewsbury. I'm sure you can talk more in terms of Dewsbury. But Standard House has been developed with 90 units of accommodation. There's one about to be opened at Dundas Street, 50 units of accommodation. Thatcher's building, 50 units of accommodation. The same investor is investing in the Co-op building, and I think that's another 50 or 60 units, and there'll be some retail development alongside. And this is a private investor who's seen the opportunities, got the message, the one that we've been talking about now, and said, that works, and I can see some future in it. He's not the only investor. There are other people invested in the same sort of thing. But predominantly, it's going to be that. We have used our own buildings Remember, you referred to the K&H one. We encourage the council to use part of estates building for K&H properties, and that has been developed. But I think it's only about 30 units now because the shape of the building is awkward. We've got to bear this in mind, the complications of working with existing buildings, which we need to live in and use, or they will go. So there's no point in having them listed unless we use them. So we have plans for the rest of estates building, we have for Tights building, we have for Britannia building, and the plans, but the ability to develop it will depend on ownership and what we might do to encourage others to invest alongside us and invest alongside. I think that's the important message to get out.
Right, thank you. Bill, have you got any comments on these 3 items of things that you'd like us to focus on?
Well, just picking up on what we've just heard, and yes, I tend to focus on Huddersfield rather than Dewsbury as well. It's just a matter of geography. I am worried about the way that Huddersfield town centre seems to be tilting, to my mind, too far towards the student market. And this is particularly in housing. There is an issue that in the summer most of the students aren't here, which is fine. And I do understand that the university is a major contributor to the local economy. But I am a little bit worried that we tend to be focusing too much on student accommodation rather than family accommodation in Huddersfield Town Centre.
Thank you. Can I bring in Naheed first, please?
I think we have to recognise that we are very, very fortunate to have a growing university with a world-renowned reputation and architecture which is well recognised. Now, saying that does not mean that we've gone to sleep in relation to our own local needs. Now, when you're talking about student accommodation, all of the student accommodation is private. It's not owned by the council. So what we own, what we build, and what Kathy talks about is all about our residents and how, moving forward, we're going to meet those needs outlined in our local plan.
Students are not the predominant people living in the town. In the case of Huddersfield, yes, it largely is, and it's a lot to do with a massive university. The developer I was referring to earlier, he was telling me only last week that he has now gone from student accommodation to student and staff accommodation at the university, and the co-op is being devised in those sort of terms. He's also finding a lot of interest in would people sell his penthouse suites, which he has, to people who want, professionals who want to live here and work in Manchester and Leeds. Now, he's aware of the phenomena of being able to get to the centre of Leeds and Manchester more easily than people who live in Leeds and Manchester. Now, that is bound to have an impact in terms of investment in living in towns and in terms of having offices in towns. So there are people aware of that and wanting to develop on the back of it. In the short term, it will be predominantly students, but the longer term, and there's another investment down in the former college building, and they're interested in the young professional living in Huddersfield, possibly working either in Huddersfield, Manchester or Leeds, and also encouraging the development whereby some of the big companies in Manchester and Leeds might want to look at their sub-offices in Huddersfield. There's an interest also in developing the buildings around the station, so we're referring to estates building, and also the railway warehouse. I mean, there's going to be opportunities there. Only yesterday, the chair of the PTA was over looking at this. We had a long discussion about the future. She was hugely impressed about the opportunities and potential of that investment that Network Rail is going to make within the next 7 years. Or it's going to be completed in the next 7 years.
Right, I think in terms of those 3 items, we've discussed them. We're probably running the danger of starting to get into some of the detail. What I'd like to do now is just bring in waste minimisation, clean air strategy and green space strategy, all three of those fall within the portfolio of Councillor Mather. So if Councillor Mather, if you'd like to say a little bit about those three items, and then we'll take any other suggestions people have, and then I think we need to think about the order in which we perhaps are going to take things in our work programme. So, Naheed.
So in terms of, can I start off with air quality? Here we would be predominantly relying on our partners, the combined authority, government regulation, and what we can do in terms of short and long-term measures. And as Councillor McBride always says, we're going to be relying on, obviously, technology, intelligent signalling system to make sure that the bottlenecks don't occur. We're thinking of putting in electric power points and encouraging people to buy electric cars. We're thinking about putting our own house in order. I mean, obviously, we've got lots of plans, and it all depends on how the investment, the pound, the change in our pockets. So by putting our house in order, we're thinking about power points in our own car parks, incentivizing our own employees, looking at our own fleets, phasing out our fleet that's currently, what's that, petrol? No, the petrol. Oh God, I can't. Sorry, it's too early. Diesel, petrol. So, whilst we're doing that, we're also making sure that parallel to that, we are running educative programs in our schools, changing habits within the household about 0% food waste, going forward, thinking about more falling into recycling, changing lifestyles and habits, and making sure that we incentivize rather than wait for the government to make their elaborate statements, that we actually put our money where our mouth is and start taking or piloting some of these measures. So in terms of air quality, we're making those initiatives and also aligning with the overall combined authorities' air quality initiatives.
Right. The other two things were the waste issue, which has been hanging around waiting to go on our agenda for quite a while. So I think it's very important that we put that on the agenda this time. What we need to perhaps determine now is what the focus of that work's going to be. And then the other thing was the green space strategy.
Sorry. In terms of the open space and green strategy, we are revising this, and the future direction is going to be much more about biodiversity, managed spaces, which are much more about wellness and how you use the space, encourage friends of groups. I think those of you who are on Twitter and social media will have known that we, out of all our parks, we got the largest number of Green Flag Awards, which means that we've got fantastic open-spaced parks and managed wildlife. We are actually modelling the revised maintenance regime to deliver a better delivery model which takes on board health and well-being, as well as providing existing biodiversity and moving towards more recyclable open spaces, and open spaces which are much more useful rather than just single use, but multifunction use. So those are some of the areas for open green spaces we're working on at the moment. Send it off. In terms of waste strategy, again, our vision is to move towards recycling much more. At the moment, we're unable to recycle as much as we would like to. Moving ahead, we're looking into piloting initiatives which would encourage and change lifestyles and use modern technology to enable us to recycle some more. Now, there are, as always, cost implications even to stand still, but moving forward, it requires a huge investment. Currently, we have a PFI contract. When it runs out in 5 years, £15 million from government subsidy will be withdrawn, which needs to be made up. But having said that, this council recognises the needs of its citizens and is investing in the future. I cannot talk about the current remodelling of the waste contract because of its commercial sensibilities, but we are already working on that currently, looking at various options, and I think by the end of this year, early next year, we will be, we're currently working up about 5 options, and we will fine-tune down to about 2 or 3 to work on and decide which is the best option for Kirklees.
Yeah, we have discussed this in some detail before, and I think in the earlier discussions with waste strategy, we said that we would like to focus on waste minimisation and the recycling elements of the development of the strategy. So those 3 items, are there any further comments? Yes.
So again, in terms of waste minimisation and greening, we are actually starting off, hopefully, piloting in our own spaces. I think those of you who actually have cups in front of them will recognise those are recyclable cups. We're looking at single use of plastic. We're going to be working with manufacturers and our high street retailers. We are going to make sure that we look at across services using catering to ensure that the educative programme and investment is put in where we recycle everything we use.
Thank you. Right, I think a number of people want to comment. Judith, can I start with you?
Right. Clean air zone. Just want to ask you about that. I mean, I'm interested at looking at that. I'm interested in looking at when Leeds bring in their clean air zone, what impact that's going to have on Kirklees residents. And also you're talking about electric cars, which sounds really good. But what impact is that going to have on our less well-off residents? I know you talked about bringing in charging points into car parks and everything, but it strikes me that if you're more well-off and you've got a drive, you can plug your car in your house, but we know we've got a lot of terraced houses across Kirklees. What happens to those residents, and will they end up paying more for the electric than someone who's more well-off and can plug it into their own properties?
Yeah, some interesting points. I think those are the kind of details that we can look at. Yes, Harpreet.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for what you said there, Naheed. Just a couple of points for me. I know I've been going on about this constantly, about fly tipping. I hate it. It's a massive bugbear I bring up all the time. And I'd just like to try and spend some time on that, really. Particularly looking at, I think the change in behaviour stuff's really important, and that's quite long term, isn't it, really? So it's looking at what we're doing long term and short term and how we fit that in with enforcement as well. I know there's massive constraints on the council's budget, given what's happening nationally as well, but I'd really like to spend a bit of time on that, if that's okay. Some good stuff around the clean air strategy and the green strategy. I think obviously a lot of that stuff needs to work together, doesn't it, really? So I'm really interested in urban green space and how that can impact on air quality in areas. And I think for a long time, we haven't taken air quality seriously at a national level, have we really? And I'd really like to look at what we're doing around walking schemes, cycle schemes, and such running schemes. You know, I know in Greater Manchester they've started to create these beeline schemes where you can look across the area, particularly if you're looking at things like people don't necessarily work in the same area they live, so looking at those commuting routes I think are really important. And just a quick thing on the on single-use plastics, I think that's really important. Great to see the council are doing some work on that, and could we do some work around incentivising perhaps our local businesses as well? And just quickly on the clean air stuff, I know Judith mentioned about electric points, and I think that's really important in terms of looking at the different communities in our area. Is there more we could do around scrutinising the bus companies around retrofitting of their engines, because they can be quite big polluters as well, can't they? So just those points. Thanks.
Thank you, Harpreet. Richard.
Yeah, just on the clean air strategy. I mean, I think obviously this is an absolutely vital issue, not least because of the imperative to cut carbon. And you know, we all know this, you can see what's happening in terms of that. But I just wanted to, it says here actually on the do's and don'ts, it says, you don't use scrutiny to explore issues specific to your ward and personal hobby horses. Well, I have to declare an interest that I am a cyclist, and I have to say, as a cyclist, you know, I think there is room for improvement in terms of encouraging it. So that would be something I guess, you know, as Harpreet said, we could think about. But the other thing that has kind of, I do think, it's about changing people's attitudes, and that really should be done ideally when they're young. And so, you know, again, maybe something we could actually look at, and it's about joining things together, because all this is obviously interconnected. It would be looking again at how kids get to school and school transport issues, because, you know, that's it's something that schools have taken seriously, and, you know, they do. I know that for a fact, teachers do, but it's, you know, it's something that I still think as a society and as in Kirklees, we still haven't really perhaps got to grips with as well as possible. And so you know, always, I know there's some great examples as well. So yeah, perhaps they could be included in the clean air strategy discussions as well.
Thank you.
I'd just like to ask about housing. I drove past Lindley Moor this morning, massive blot on the landscape. It looks very impressive, though I wouldn't like to live there. And then there's Grimesca and so on. It occurred to me to wonder whether we're still working towards a massive government target as far as house building is concerned.
Could we come back to that when we move on to the next agenda item, because we're particularly looking at housing for the next presentation? Yeah, it's a good point if we could come back to that. Right, Carl, I think if we make this the last contribution, and then if we... Right, just quickly, yeah.
I just wanted to make a point about the fly tipping. I mean, I would be interested in looking at it, but from a West Yorkshire point of view, because I get the figures for fire, because of course there's a link between fly tipping and fires, and Kirklees is the best authority across West Yorkshire. We have the least number of incidents of fly tipping. So if you could bring that, and we can just look at that and see how good Kirklees actually is.
Thank you. Carl first, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of comments really to support what's been said. I think just in terms of air quality, I think one of the things we need to have sight of is one of the best things we can do to improve air quality is to reduce congestion. and we had a number of big highway schemes on the books, particularly around Cooper Bridge, which if you've ever sat in the queue there, you'll know well, because that hits the dual thing of being able to improve air quality but also help with economic regeneration and connectivity. So it will be useful, I think, for Scrutiny to understand that and what we can do to make sure those schemes happen. So there's lots of things we can include under the banner of air quality, and if we're not careful, we'll lose a bit of focus on it, really. Just in terms of waste, similar really, massive area, but really I think the bit that I think the committee can add real value on is around how we engender behaviour change amongst the public, not just around recycling, but maybe recycling and enviro crime. So whilst fly tipping is, to take your point, is good compared to other places, you know, littering, dog fouling isn't. We've got a contract with Kingdom at the moment. Well, we terminate the contract, we're rolling over on a 4-weekly period. And one of the things we are looking at is, as a council, how could we do something different around education and enforcement to help engender behaviour change? So maybe, if the committee are in agreement, if we maybe could focus in on that area rather than the whole gambit of waste, which covers a vast area.
Yeah, I think that always was the intention, that we were going to try and focus down, because otherwise it's going to be far too big. Yeah. Last contribution, I think, and then we'll just try and pull things together, have a quick look at prioritisation of things, and then we'll move on to housing. Naid, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to round off, and I wanted to thank Councillor Hughes for mentioning the fact that we are doing well, but we're not complacent. I understand, and as we move forward, we're talking about a much more holistic and a seamless service. As we move forward, we are about people, places and our partners. Nothing that the Council does can be done on its own unless it's enhanced by our residents and our partners. We are changing behaviours. We have actually had pilots. Our officers do go into schools. We have had demonstrations, and we are looking into homeschool transport in Kirklees. And about 4 years ago, I think, in Kirklees, in Almondbury and Dalton, I think Prow did do a signage and walking routes, and it was more to do with health and well-being and mental illness. So we have had small initiatives, but these are lifestyle changes. And in relation to all of the areas under each cabinet holder's portfolio are massive, and for Scrutiny to really enable us to help is to be much more focused on threads that may be in our working. There's an oversight, or we haven't done as much work, so I welcome anything that Scrutiny wants to look at, and we can furnish you with the information you may need. Thank you.
Okay, so next thing before we look at prioritisation, is there anything else that anybody else wants to raise? Any other member of the panel that we haven't got on the agenda? Right. It could be that as the year progresses that other things come up, but I think we've got a fair bit on our plate here really to cover. I think it will keep us out of mischief really. In terms of scheduling things, we might not be able to do it exactly today because it does need some discussion with officers and with cabinet members, because it's all about when papers will be ready and things like that in an appropriate guise for us to have a look at. But just sort of looking at the things that we've covered, just to make some quick suggestions. I think the economic strategy is something that underpins a lot of the other things that are happening. And it certainly is, as Peter said, it's a follow-on from what's happening with the local plan. I think it's really important that we do look at things like investment which is taking place, the transport developments, but I agree with Richard. I think it's very important that we also look at the kind of work that's happening in terms of inclusive growth, social value, and the work that's been undertaken by CLES. I know there's already quite a lot happened in terms of work with officers. I think it would be good to get more councillors involved in that process. So I'm suggesting that we look at that, if we can bring something to the next meeting to begin the discussion around that. And I think we probably need a full meeting to really focus on that, with perhaps a few report backs on different things. Following on from that, you've got the towns and communities strategy and the skills strategy. I think either of those, I think we perhaps need to go away and have a look at that and decide in which order we take those. But I certainly think we should take those before Christmas. I know from initial discussions that I've already had that the green space strategy is getting to the point where it would be quite useful to bring that to scrutiny. I also think there's a lot of overlap between the green space strategy and the economic strategy and what the town centre strategy. Those things tie together. So that's another item that I would like to see us look at this side of Christmas. Then, after we've got the break, we've then got the other issues. Waste, I think, is such a big issue. I think we may need a couple of meetings to look at that. And then we've got the clean air issue. And then finally, I think if we, towards the back end of the year, if we give time for your group, Judy, to have a look at these fire safety issues, it will give you plenty of time to do some research. Yeah, it'd be good to start it now, but then you may want to give us some kind of interim reports as we're working through the year. But I think it would be good to do that, I don't know, perhaps December, to have a quick interim report, but then a final report on that at the end of the year, so we can really give that the discussion that it deserves. Does that sound like a working plan? We may have to tinker with it a little bit. Peter?
Partly going on experience previously, you've got a really ambitious programme there. The danger is it's too wide. Remember what Carl said. Focus on the things that you can properly investigate and do it thoroughly, rather than have loads of investigation which are very superficial. And maybe in some areas, the ones that you've highlighted, you should be receiving information on rather than... So you're making choices ultimately about what you're going to receive information on and what you're really going to investigate. Of course, that's your choice. But
yeah, I've made a lot of notes from comments that people have made which have indicated areas of particular interest, both council members, panel members and officers and cabinet members. I think what we need to do is quite a bit of work to determine exactly what the focus is going to be before every item comes along, because otherwise, yeah, the scope of it can just get too massive, really. Right, okay. Right, suggest now if we have a quick break for 5 minutes and then we go into the housing issue. We might want to have a bit of a move round as well, so Helen and the team are at the front, so we can lead off with the housing things. Okay. Right, we're going to move on to item 5 on the agenda, which is looking at the draft housing strategy and the allocations policy. So with this, I think Cathy Scott, who's the portfolio holder for this area, is going to do a brief introduction. We've all had the papers, we've had the documents to read, so we're then going to focus on asking questions. Okay, so Cathy, if you'd like to lead off for us, please.
Yeah, I'll introduce myself. My name's Councillor Cathy Scott. I didn't do it earlier. My portfolio remits adults, social care, housing and health. So you all have the strategy. I do believe it's been back quite a few times with different fragments of it. So today I'm condensing it down because it's quite a comprehensive report for you to read. But for me, my point I want to make to you today, we've got to be realistic that there is a housing need across Kirklees and indeed across the country, and there's a wide range of demand that's required. So we're looking at varying needs. So our priorities that we've put down are the housing need, the housing quality and the housing growth, but also strategically built into that is the national picture, locally, and also what the key challenges are. So, as I said, we have to be innovative. I said that earlier this morning, looking at new ways of doing things. And Kirklees Council cannot and is not able to deal with this demand alone. So we have to broaden our horizons, work in partnership with different organisations to see how we can encourage housing to be developed across Kirklees. So throughout this period, and you'll have noted in your pack, it did give you a timescale from 2018 to 2023, that we will be, as a council, facilitators, enablers, and in some cases developers, and in partnership with the development. So there's some of the context that I want you to look at, but one of the key things that I think that I asked for, there was a graph put on, and it's on page 13, I do believe, that it actually shows you the different levels of need within housing. And when we talk about that we need affordable housing, so what do we actually mean about affordable housing? Now, for me, there's different levels of affordable. There's a low-level affordable for people, you know, on low income, or there's high-level affordable. So we need to get them, you know, our priorities right on that. We're looking and working in partnership with other organisations that perhaps can facilitate that. We're looking at enhancing the private sector, working with them, complementing them to see where we can move forward. So there's a wide range of things that we are looking at, and obviously this is a draft plan. We do welcome Scrutiny's input into this, you know, and we will take your comments on board and see, you know, if there are things that we've missed that perhaps you can, you know, guide us that we know we should be looking at. So I'm going to stop there because I'm conscious there's going to be quite a lot of questions on this today. So, okay.
Right. Thanks very much, Cathy. Quite a number of these areas we did discuss in detail last year as well, because we had a few sessions looking at this for the members who were part of the panel last year. Just before we go into the questions, we've been joined by 3 members of the housing team. Would you like to introduce yourselves before you help answer the questions?
Hello, my name's Helen Gelder. I'm the Head of Housing Services with Kirklees Council.
I'm Kath McGurk. I'm the Operations Manager in the Housing Solutions Service.
Good morning, my name's Karen Oates. I'm the Housing Commissioning Manager, Access to Housing.
Right, thank you. What I suggest as well, because we've actually got 2 documents to look at. There's the strategy and then there's the housing allocation policy update. So what I'm suggesting is we perhaps spend 40 minutes or so, if necessary, on the housing strategy to give ourselves 10 minutes at the end to talk about the housing allocation policy, if that seems okay. Yeah. Okay, right. First question. Bill.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. A couple of points to make. First one, and demographically speaking and personally speaking, we have an ageing population. I would like to see some recognition. We get starter homes, but we don't get what I tend to think of inelegantly as finisher homes. We've got lifetime housing, but that doesn't necessarily do the job. We need specifically bungalows, level access, because as people get older, they do tend to be more liable to become disabled. Not necessarily a one-to-one, but it does happen. And I don't see that we're actually getting this. It's partly K&H, but it's largely private sector. And it's a great worry to me with the rural ward. I get lots and lots and lots of planning applications. They're virtually all for 4 or 5 bedroom detached executive houses, but there's nothing that's suitable for older people to downsize into. And I know it's difficult, we can't direct builders to develop this, that and the other, but we can perhaps influence them. Thank you.
Yeah, I think housing for older people is a really big issue. Who would like to take that question first? Yeah, Kath.
Oh, no doubt officers may want to come in on this as well, but yes, we are looking at facilities for older people, and I think that you were talking down the path of bungalows. It's what's profitable for developers. So we have looked at this, and you know we are encouraging it. So part of our strategy will be releasing some of our land that will be used for bungalows. So we will be looking at that. But it's not just about bungalows. It's about keeping people safe, you know, and being part of community. So there's your extra care facilities, And we've got a lot of good practice, you know, that we've learned from. You know, people, you know, the communities in themselves now, you know, and people are enjoying that. It's about protecting our most vulnerable, but there is a lot of ideas, and it actually does state it in the paper as well. But bungalows aren't the only thing. It's not. There's also supported living accommodations as well.
Just slightly missed the point. Point is, with the rural area, we've got villages, we've got discrete communities, but people, as they get older, require a different type of housing, tend to get shunted away from where the memories are and the lifetime is. The other point that I do want to make, and it does worry me, is K&H allocations policy. What used to be thought of as old folks' accommodation is now general.
Would anybody else like to do that? I don't know if you want to speak again. So if you want to speak, and if anybody else wants to come in, yeah.
Right, okay. So, Bill, your point, the first part I can't remember. Right. You talk about the rural community, and we absolutely understand that. Absolutely understand that we need to be getting developers, you know, looking more towards rural communities. But, you know, it's like everything. You've got to be on board as councillors and embrace development and the needs of people rather than see it as a political battle. And that's what tends to happen. And not to you, and it becomes a political playing field. It's about houses and homes for people. Politics outside the door. It's about getting the need within communities. And I'm not talking, I can see you feel quite flustered about that. I'm not talking about you in general. I'm just saying politics plays a lot in housing and we forget about people's needs.
Sorry, Bill, I didn't catch that.
Yes, politics shouldn't be part of it. I'm talking about community need. I'm talking about personal need.
Yeah.
I am not talking about politics.
No, and we did say in our kind of pre-meeting that it is important that we try and keep
I agree.
Politics out of things. Right, would anyone else like to comment on that? Yes, Helen.
I just think the strategy also looks at enabling people to remain in their existing home, because research shows that actually many people prefer to stay in their own home and in their own community because of some of the reasons you've just mentioned in terms of not wanting to move away. So the strategy does include a lot of work around, you know, adapting properties and enabling people to get the support that they need to remain in their own home as well.
Cathy and then Carl.
Just a point of order, and Councillor Armour, if you took it the wrong way, it wasn't meant that way. What it was meant to say is quite often campaigns are done to stop any kind of development within rural, urban communities, and that's the problem we have. It's about people's needs, and I'm glad you're saying that. It is about the needs of our communities and the people.
Thank you. Carl.
Just maybe to wrap up on a couple of things, and maybe start with the first point that Mr Mercer made earlier around government targets for housing and growth. So we need to see this strategy in the context of our local plan, which sets out the overall housing numbers we'll need over the next 20 years or so, and how we help achieve those. So we have something in the range of 20,000 homes is the sort of need that we need to identify. The local plan identifies the sites and issues for that, and as part of that we have to look at what the type of accommodation is we require. So we do have a policy around what we call affordable housing, but that doesn't necessarily have to be to deliver housing that is, discounted at market value. It can actually be for specialist or adapted accommodation if that is a local need. Councillor Scott's quite right as well in that, the local plan has been a challenging document, and in many of our rural communities people don't want to see new development, so that's where we need to look at how we can adapt existing accommodation to help people live at home comfortably in the right context. But clearly we do need to provide for both levels of the housing spectrum, starter homes, what you call aspirational properties, but also things that are suitable for community needs. We'll come on to the allocations policy in due course, but again we are alive to that issue around compatibility, if I can put it that way, of different people with different lifestyles located in the same area, and how we deal with that.
Mark, you asked a question earlier, sorry, You asked a question earlier, and I said we would come back to it. So would you like to ask that again?
Well, I was just wondering whether we were actually getting on towards this government target and whether the target is in fact appropriate anyway. I mean, we're obviously doing a lot of building, but where are we with it?
Right, so that's sort of looking at where we are in terms of the housing figure within the local plan, how far we are towards achieving that, what's got to happen in the future. Is that right?
We're also very anxious about the infrastructure as well, schools and dentists and you know what. In the past, we've been told there was an awful lot of building of houses, like on Neighbourhoods, without the schools being able to cope. Now, my impression is that the council has got no control over it at all, that the developers control it and they're just there to make their money.
Yes, I think there are concerns there that are shared by a lot of people in our communities. Yeah, Peter.
I can answer that. In terms of infrastructure, we had to prove to an inspector that we were capable of ensuring all the infrastructure was there before we allocated sites for development. And at a later stage, when the particular site is being developed, it will go before a committee, and the committee will say, we'll have to be convinced that that infrastructure very specifically is going to meet the needs of that community, and that will include education. We are required as an education authority to ensure that there's an adequate number of schools relating to populations and communities. That is a permanent commitment, so we're always bound to meet that need. So there are checks in there to make sure that the infrastructure is adequate.
If I go for a drive round Linley Moor, for example, am I going to actually see any of this infrastructure?
The infrastructure is there already. The traffic can move, I know, with some difficulty. If you compare Linley to the more difficult parts of, say, Leeds, Bradford, Wakefield, you find it's pretty good. However, I do accept that Linley's got more problems, as, say, Mills Bridge has also, more problems than most areas. But there is always a problem of balancing the need for the housing on the one hand and where communities are, and bearing in mind the existing infrastructure is ancient, and remodifying it to meet future needs. That's a permanent challenge. I agree with you. Linley is challenging.
We're not talking about roads so much as doctors' surgeries and those sort of facilities that people might be able to walk to. Are any of those going to be... I mean, has the council got any power at all to deal with that?
With regard to doctor's surgery, we can't determine that, but we do have an influence over the CCGs, and we do have an influence in our health strategy, and we are taken seriously in making those. But always bear in mind that the health system is still half privatised. Doctors, surgeries and so on are determined by the private sector. It's significantly private where these developments take place.
The other part of the original question, in terms of where we are in meeting our housing target overall in the plan, could we just comment on that, please?
Meeting the inspector made a comment in approving the 31,000, which means about 1,750 per annum, pointing out you haven't achieved that over the previous years, so how can you assure me that you're going to be able to deliver? What the strategy will be is the rate of take-up will not be equal throughout the whole 15-year period. It will accelerate. The other factor which will determine this is the fact we own so much land, and that the land we've allocated, well, in significant sites, as in Ravensthorpe, as in Bradley, we own, therefore delivery will be much more dependent on what we do rather than simply the private developers. The private developers will be us in partnership with developers, so we can influence the rate and scale of development.
Richard.
Yeah, I just so I'm just looking at the action points beginning on page 45 of this document. Well, I'll just kind of jump ahead because and just move to point 9, which is on page 49 of the document. So basically, what this does, it sets out the kind of target and the metrics and so on. I just wanted to kind of build on something Kathy said, actually, because, I mean, obviously we've got a key issue for housing in this area, and that issue is affordability. And in itself, it's a word, and, you know, that doesn't necessarily cast that much light on the issue, because of, you know, obviously we could get into semantics here, and it's not some kind of esoteric philosophical question about what is affordable and what isn't. Yeah, and I appreciate Kathy's point. You know, I actually like that idea of actually banding. That's a good idea. Now, I'm just wondering if we could build on this, because if our job, and you know, bear with me because this is my first meeting, but I assume our job is to actually scrutinise in terms of testing delivery and target meeting and so on and so forth. It just strikes me that perhaps we could develop a more robust definition of affordability that's quantified much more fully, possibly building on, you know, Kathy's kind of schema, which I thought was actually pretty good. Because as set out in page 10 and 11 of this document, you know, it quite rightly stresses the, you know, the very diverse nature of the housing stock within this area. So I think we would therefore, I would suggest we need perhaps a more robust and detailed metric to actually measure affordability. I mean, we've got our number of 10,000 is the target, and we've got a date, is 2023. So that's basically what I was going to suggest on that one.
Okay, who'd like to respond to that?
Yeah, I take everything on board, and that's something that I can take back, you know, for officers to add into this, and maybe it is a focus piece of work that you want to look at. But part of the things that I forgot to say to you, you know, when we talk about social housing, particularly the council owns 23,000 social housing. Currently on our waiting list today, we're just short of 13,000 applications. Now, the average size family in Kirklees, 2.1, 2.2, that is a lot of people where demand we cannot meet. And they're the people that we know about, not the ones that we don't know about. There's quite a few that don't sign up. You know, they might be waiting for housing association or other kind of association, private rented. So these are the ones that we actually know about. So, you know, but I do take on board what you said, Richard, and it would be a good piece of work.
I think we do exercise locality and incomes of residents in need, and when we talk about affordability, it's lowest when we're talking about joint income of 30,000 per annum.
In terms of some of the questions, you've got to bear in mind we do not control all the variables in terms of, you know, bringing things forward, or in terms of, you know, a developer getting planning permission and actually building the houses. You can't make them. Our power to stop them land banking is limited. That's why I say the importance of having our own land. We're not going to land bank our planning approvals. We're going to use them. So that's a significant fact. Also, in terms of affordability, my definition of affordability, I'm sure all of my colleagues, is different from the government's. The government regards affordable as a house costing 450,000 in London and 250,000 in outside. That isn't affordable in Kirklees terms. So we've got a problem there. And it's the government define, and the developers can come back to us and say, but we are developing affordable housing by the government's definition.
Yeah. Briefly, yeah.
Sorry, really briefly, yeah, I totally agree, Pete. And the other variable, of course, is that between now and 2023, market conditions will change, and that there's all sorts of, rent levels change, blah, 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 blah. But I suppose what I'm asking is whether we as a council could actually develop a Kirklees-based metric, that actually might help us better understand, achievement of targets and so on. So that's all really. So.
Just to pick up on the affordability issue, I mean, I think we've tried to relate that to the local context in page 10 and 11 of the document, where we talk about what average household incomes are, what average property prices are. So, and obviously that changes over time as well, and it changes within the district based on, people's travel patterns, work patterns, all that sort of thing. So when we get a planning application in, and we have a policy that says 20% is affordable housing, what we ask for and what is affordable is different on each application in each area. So, as Councillor Breyer said, what is affordable in London is highly unaffordable here. So we do relate it back to the local context. So I don't know if that fully answers your question or gives you a bit of comfort that we do that.
Break, you've been waiting patiently.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with the points that have just been made, and also by Richard. I do think it would be useful on 9 and 10 and 11, where we're talking about the cross-tenure homes, if we could have a little bit more of a breakdown on that in the targets. I think that would be useful in terms of different types of tenures. I don't know how possible that is, but that would be helpful, I think. The other point I just wanted to ask about is in September, there's going to be, I'll try and get this right, new household projections that are going to be available. I just wanted to check how that will be fed into our numbers, looking at housing population going forward and the number of homes that are needed.
Can I come back on that? I'll be honest with you, Harpreet. I don't know how that will be fed in. It will come back to at some point. But the figures that we've submitted for our local plan will remain as they are. And then, obviously, we'll look further into the future as it develops further. But I will keep you posted. I've made a note of it. Naz Parker isn't here today that would have possibly been able to answer. But no doubt Carl can.
I'll have a go. Councillor Scott's right. I mean, we are moving now towards the adoption of our local plans. The intention being by the end of the year we will have adopted it. So the inspector who's presided over it is comfortable that the evidence we've used to come up with our number of houses, so the housing need element is robust and correct. We have to monitor our delivery against that, and we have to submit returns to the government. So the household projection figures are part of that analysis. So clearly, if the need for houses increases beyond our projection, then we would have to look at our trajectory in terms of need and delivery and adjust accordingly. And that's something we do now, which is part of the difficulty we've had in terms of achieving the numbers we have. So we deliver about 1,000 homes a year, or we have been doing in Kirklees. We're going up to about 1,750, so that's the identified need. So the inspector will be looking at us closely to see what that trajectory looks like. So although she's accepted the numbers, she's allowed us to effectively put in a slightly different trajectory, because you don't go from 1,000 to 1,700 in a year. There is time for that to actually factor in and grow. So we will continue to monitor that. And it may well be that when we get into the plan 3, 4, 5 years, actually we need to review the plan and we need to look again at what those numbers are, in the same way that we may well have to look at employment sites and what that looks like in terms of needs. So it's a dynamic document. We don't just adopt it and it stays that way for 10, 15 years.
Yeah, I was going to ask a question about that, because we've actually got a target figure of 10,000 houses over 5 years. So that's 2,000 per year. And I just wondered if we thought that was deliverable.
It's incredibly challenging. The figure of 10,000 is Broadly, what's in the local plan for that period, but we've basically rounded it up because it's an easier number to remember and actually has more impact. It's an aspiration to get to that number, and part of the thing we're doing, as well as the housing strategy, is we're having a housing delivery plan that goes with it. We anticipate about 1,000 of those homes will be on sites that we own, so we've got a significant influence in delivery. But it will be incredibly challenging to get to that number. You're talking about 40 or 50 developments on-site building at any one time across the borough. So we realise it's a real challenge, but we want to stretch and push ourselves. We're an ambitious borough, and we clearly need to make up for the shortfall in housing that hasn't been delivered over the previous years.
We're on now. Yeah, I just say it's a really good document. The only thing I will say as a negative, I did find it quite a bit dry when I was reading it, and it's something I'm interested in. So when it becomes public facing, if we can maybe sex it up a little bit, just to say that. I've got a few questions. One was around empty homes. What powers have we got, and what are we actually doing to bring these homes back into use? Because I know of a few houses that have been empty for over 20 years and still sat there. Also about the private landlords and the accreditation scheme, and how are we policing that accreditation scheme? And it does say we're going to extend and strengthen that scheme, and how we're going to go about actually doing that. And then also it says we're developing Kirklees quality standard framework. I'd like to know some more details about what that actually is.
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. I think especially given this week, the prosecution of someone with the death of children in houses within Kirklees. It's a very important issue.
On the accreditation scheme, that is something that obviously that's something that we've had for a while now in Kirklees, but we recognise that we need to have a look at that again, and we need to refresh it, and we need to do much more with our local landlords, to engage with them and encourage them to comply with the law in regard to their business, if you like, in terms of managing private rented sector properties. So we will be putting in place plans to address those issues with landlords and to try and improve the accreditation scheme. We want to incentivise members to, landlords to get involved with that scheme, so we're looking at ways in which we can do that at the current time. We're also looking at trying to develop and improve and use new legislative powers around any enforcement action that we might be able to take in relation to landlords who don't comply with the requirements. There is a report going to Council, to Cabinet in the near future around introducing civil penalty notices, where rather than taking individual landlords to court where they breach legislation, we can actually serve a civil penalty notice and fine the landlord for any breaches. Again, that will help us to improve the condition of the private rented sector across Kirklees, because we know that is an issue which is covered in the strategy, that there are around 6,000 or so, it'll probably change, properties where there are health and safety risks to the residents who live in those properties. And obviously the accreditation scheme is a way of us trying to help lift that whole sector.
Yeah, I get your point there, Helen, but my main thing is, how are we going to police this scheme? If we give them accreditation, how often are we going to go back and check that these properties are still in, the state that we're wanting them to be in?
I think in reviewing the scheme, we need to add that in to make sure that we're checking the accreditation, because it's the properties that we check, that we're accrediting. We have to check that the landlord is a fit and proper person. But you're right, in the way that we do our licensing of houses in multiple occupation and go back and check those, we need to add that into the accreditation scheme to give us that assurance.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Helen's just said, and Councillor Hughes particularly passionate about HMOs, because we've been and seen quite a few that aren't standard, and it is about driving that quality up and saying what's acceptable. I believe that if we have a quality, people will go by our reputation knowing that we're endorsing somebody. But I think it's key that, you know, maybe it was something I also missed, that it's not about the person that's renting the property, it's actually the quality of the property. So we need to have something built in. Maybe is it something annual? I don't know. There's something, I think that I need to go back and look at that. And regards to the CPN that Helen mentioned, I think it's a paper that maybe, it's only a small paper, maybe it's something that should come to you and you should have sight of. So if that's okay.
Thank you. I think another thing linked to that are the opportunities for people who are living in houses which are substandard to be able to report through their concern. I think the mechanisms for them to be able to do that, I think, are really important as well. Okay. Judith, if you just quickly finish that off and then we'll go to Richard.
I also asked another question, what was about the Kirklees Quality Standard Framework and what was going on there.
Can I come in on that again? What we're trying to do is to look at the quality standards across all of the accommodation in Kirklees. So we want to look at the quality standards in the private rented sector that we've just been talking about, and really try and make sure that we've got an aspiration for the quality of private sector properties in this district. That's something we need to work up and develop. And we push that then through our landlord forums and through our accreditation scheme and other avenues to lift the whole area. In terms of the social housing stock, we want to look at a quality standard framework there as well, so that people who are moving into the council's own housing stock are assured of the quality of the accommodation that they will be living in. And then there is work, I think, linked to new developments and to new housing stock, where again we look at the quality of that accommodation. So it's new and developing, but it is trying to raise the quality of accommodation across the district.
Yeah, I just wanted to build on what both Judith and Rob said about, you know, item 7 here about quality. Because obviously we know that an increasing number of the population are now privately renting, and this is a tremendously difficult area to actually, for the council to intervene. And well, me and Rob are history teachers, we could talk about various housing initiatives in Britain over the years, but I mean, in terms of, it seems to me there's 3 different kind of approaches. You can inspire by good example, you can hold out a carrot, which is an incentives to landlords. So my first question is, what incentives to landlords are you actually going to be putting forward? And you can wield the stick and have enforcement procedures. So, yeah, so, I mean, obviously that's kind of determined by national framework, but there is actually another way, I think, maybe we could raise standards and perhaps, you know, get private landlords to improve the service, and that's actually empowering the tenants. Now, we've got a problem because obviously we know that, you know, various advice bodies, like the Citizens Advice Bureau and so on, have, you know, relatively compared to the past, have less resources and so on. So that's a question I really would just want to ask, actually. How, you know, if we can promote awareness, better reporting systems, as Rob was saying, you know, just empower that feeling among tenants that actually there are these quality standards that are absolutely unnegotiable, but everyone knows what they are. And so I don't know what your thoughts on that would be. It's not easy. I'm not saying any of this is easy, but I just wondered, you know, whether you've got any thoughts on how we could promote those things.
Yes, private sector. We do, as Kirklees, on our website, there is a private sector, knowing your rights about housing and the quality of housing. And there is a unique number, I do believe, that you can ring, should you have issue, and there's all that advice and guidance, as you said, Citizens Advice Bureau and things like that. But you can also contact your local ward councillor if there is an issue, you know, and filter it through that way. You know, I've had many where people have come to me, but people are quite vulnerable when they're in these properties, and depending on the state of the property and what the landlord does, so, you know, they're quite frightened to come forward. So we can say as much as we want, but it's the vulnerability of that person wanting to come forward. Because I know a street of about 12 were evicted because they said something. So, and it's about protecting that person.
Thank you. Right, we are running out of time a little bit, so Mark, I think you wanted to ask a question. If we can try and keep them fairly short, yeah.
Land banking came up last year in rather despairing tones, and we were led to think the council could do absolutely nothing except wring its hands. I just wondered how significant or otherwise it actually is, and whether there is any way forward for the council to improve on a situation.
Yeah, just wanted to ask a quick one about rough sleeping. Really encouraged by the housing first approach. I think that'll be really interesting, and I'd love to, I'm sure we'll be kept updated, but that's something I'll certainly be following. So that's really good news. Just in terms of, just a quick one about the Homeless Reduction Act and what impact and perhaps the challenges around that for colleagues. I mean, I work as a caseworker for an MP, and we're constantly struggling with rough sleepers who aren't in the priority and need category. And I'm just wondering what sort of position we are in, really, to be able to deal with that. And in this day and age, obviously, it's awful for all of us to see people on the streets, and we want to do the best, don't we, around that. So any additional information you can provide on that would be useful. And I know you might not be able to do that right now, but just wanted to make that point.
Judith, did you have another question?
No, I was just going to talk about housing first as well, because that does play into the allocations policy when we come to that. So just a bit more detail on the housing first.
Right, so there's two questions, one about land banking and the other about work that we are doing on rough sleeping and in response to the Homeless Reduction Act.
I'd answer on land banking. The answer is yes, all we can do is wring our hands. The former leader of this council, David Sheard, and myself, went to see the Minister together with our counterparts, both leaders and cabinet and portfolio holders, to talk to the then Minister Nick Bowles, and he said, we asked him what he could do, what he would do, was he prepared to do something about land banking. We gave him lots of examples, one in my ward. There's a developer in my ward who's got approval for 360 houses, had that for 10 years, never developed them. What can we do about that? The Minister just said he wasn't prepared to take any action. And subsequently, that was about 3 years ago, the government has not moved at all on that position. And you can read it actually in the white paper on housing. You've got the Prime Minister wringing her hands about but not prepared to do anything about it.
Just to add to that, Chair, and members correct, once you implement your planning permission, it's live forever and a day, and we can't always do much about that. One of the other authorities in Yorkshire is going to be writing to the Minister, asking them to consider an approach whereby if people land bank and don't proceed with development, effectively that they're required to pay the council tax they would have done if they'd have built the houses in relation to their delivery schedule. And he's going to be asking the rest of us to sort of line up behind and agree that. I doubt very much whether that will change anything, but that was one suggestion about how we could potentially encourage, have a bit of a stick for developers to get on and build once they've got a permission.
Yeah, I think some joint action and publicising that is a good move, yeah.
Okay, so the last thing, the Homeless Reduction
Act, rough sleeping. Very, very quickly, can we respond to that?
The Homelessness Reduction Act came in on the 3rd of April, so it's quite early days, but it isn't, we do not look at whether somebody has got a priority need. Now, actually, we used to help a lot of single people who might have ended up with sleeping anyway, so we're not seeing a big change around that. We believe we've had quite an impact, and we see that with our near neighbours, and nationally we fare quite well on the numbers of rough sleepers, but we know it's challenging, and it's challenging for everybody. And the Housing First model could be a solution for some with the more complex needs, but we also need to be mindful of trying to stop people entering into having to rough sleep. So we're looking at accessing the private rented sector more for more singles.
Right, because of time pressures, I think we could spend quite a lot more time on this, what was a very thorough and excellent report. We will now need to move on to look at the allocation policy review. So, Bill, do you want to start us with the first question?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. As I started and got pushed back earlier, I'm worried about the policies, and they do go back 30, 40 years, I believe. But we have housing that, when I was a lad, were built as old folks' accommodation. They're put aside for people over 55, I think it was. It seems that now these are taken as being part of the general supply housing stock. But it doesn't always help people, and it sometimes means that there are older and vulnerable people unable to move into these. I'm just wondering what policies can be tweaked, perhaps, to address this.
Yeah, the open age policy that you're talking about was 2012, where we Cabinet made some decisions looking at the housing need across the borough and the number of properties that were designated for different age groups to try and get some consistency of approach. So at that time, there was a decision taken to have an open age policy so that all properties, apart from our retirement living scheme properties, would be allocated, which are for people over 60, would be allocated to anybody on the allocations waiting list, depending on housing need. As I say, that was in 2012, and associated with that policy change, Cabinet also agreed, and it's in the existing policy now, that there would be what we have called a local lettings framework, and attached to that a plan around being able to take action where we need to create sustainable, resilient communities. So there is a local lettings framework and a local lettings plan as part of the allocations policy, which can be used in cases where there are clashes of lifestyle or significant antisocial behaviour issues to try and better manage an area of accommodation. It can also be used when we have new build accommodation or we're refurbishing blocks to ensure that we get a good mix of communities so that we can ensure community cohesion moving forward. I have to say that that particular local lessons framework and local lessons policy hasn't been used very much over the last few years. So I think, bearing in mind some of the comments that were made by the panel last time, we've discussed that with Cathy as the portfolio holder, and it's been agreed that we should have a review of the open age policy and the local lettings framework and plan policy to see whether or not it's still relevant, it's still appropriate, whether it should be tweaked, as you suggest, or whether it's still fit for purpose. So we're planning to undertake that review, and obviously there'll be an opportunity for us to engage with others as part of that review, so Scrutiny might wish to be involved or to comment on that review further moving forward.
Yeah, just to give you a bit of background, we did discuss this in the full panel last year, but then we had a very long follow-up meeting with Councillor Hughes, myself, Councillor Scott and several officers, and we did look at it in quite a lot of detail, which is what's led to this review taking place. So I guess one of the big issues is, how can we support that? Is it appropriate for us to become involved in the review process? And if so, do you want some volunteers to join the group?
I'd welcome that involvement. Yeah, we're just in the process of setting up the arrangements for actually planning how we're going to carry out that review and who will be involved from an officer point of view, and then developing a communication and engagement plan. But certainly be welcome to get some views from members of the panel.
Yes, so have we any people who are interested in involvement in that? Yeah. Right, Bill, yes. Judith? Right, so you've got a couple of volunteers there, I think, who can join that group. It is a difficult area, I think, this, because I share your concerns, and certainly residents in my ward have shared those concerns with me. But then at the other end of the age spectrum, we have got issues. As someone who has worked in further education, I know there can be real problems in terms of housing younger people. It's balancing those demands and managing those things, really, I think, which is quite a thorny problem, really. Yes, Judith.
sort of anticipated what I was going to say there, because when we did have the scrutiny, age designation was a big issue for me until we sat down and I heard about the local lettings policy, which is a really good idea, but as you say, it's not being used because we didn't really know anything about it. One of the things I said before, I mentioned housing first, and that will come up with the allocations policy, because I think where we've got people coming into areas, particularly with older people, it is older people who mainly complain about people coming in and they don't like these people, and they're coming in with issues, maybe they've been homeless and they've got complex needs, and we've talked about this. But hopefully the Housing First will get on board with those people that are being moved into those areas. And on top of that is also about the children coming out of care, which I totally agree with, that there should be a priority. But is there going to be some backup for those young people that are coming out of care and maybe going into a flat? Because what you tend to get is that then other young people target those young people.
Yeah, those are the kind of details, I guess, this review will take up. I don't know if there are any kind of closing comments on this just before we finish. Yeah.
I just want to say that I welcome Scrutiny's involvement in this, and any subcommittees or groups or even discussion groups out of here, you know, talking and feeding into it, because, you know, it develops any kind of structure that we're going to have. And it's about being realistic. On our housing estates at the moment, you've got a mixture of age, and a lot of the places I go to where the young people that are living, they've got signs all over saying no ball games. So how are these young people meant to have a lifestyle and a good quality of lifestyle? Equally, it's about using common sense with who you're mixing and matching within the tenancies. So, yes, we welcome everything, you know, you've got to say, and you're pushing out an open door.
I'll bring the meeting to, that element of the meeting to a close. Thanks very much to officers and Cabinet members for coming along and answering questions. I think that's been very useful. And as Councillor Hughes commented earlier, I do think that the housing strategy document is a very useful document, which will help us meet the very great challenge, really, of meeting housing needs over the next 15, 20 years. So thanks very much for coming along. Right, so just to tie up the meeting, the dates of future meetings and the overview and scrutiny guide. Yeah, okay, so we discussed that earlier. We talked about this, and we had a brief discussion around it for item 6. For item 7, the dates of the next meetings, we've also talked about a programme of meetings for the rest of the year. Our first meeting is on September. Is it the 5th? Yeah. So the next meeting is going to be on the afternoon, I think, of the 5th of September. So thanks very much, everybody, for taking part today. Thank you.